Kia ora koutou katoa. Welcome, Morena. It's morning here in New Zealand. I know it's late in other parts of the world, but it's lovely to have you all here. This is RaC Guild Town Hall number 24. That's 2 years of rules as code goodness that we have gone through together. Great to start with a presentation, and then we're going to have questions later from Martin Perron from Canada. Martin's a lawyer who's turned developer, which is what we'd like to see more lawyers do generally across the world. So a return from Martin, but also we'll be looking at some tools that he's been building, using, developing, innovating, combining AI with blocks that we've already seen here presented earlier in our town halls. So it's wonderful to see these things come together. This is exactly why we put the RaC Guild together, is to see some of these things to start merging to improve the speed and the velocity of turning the world's PDFs into something that machines can read. So without further ado, Martin, please do go ahead. We'll have questions at the end. If you want to plonk them in chat, please do, but generally we will try and deal with them once the presentation's finished. So Martin, take it away for us. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I have a video set up, and this video is kind of a collection of just different things I've been doing in the neurosymbolic rules as code space. So when I talk about neurosymbolic AI, I'm talking about the combination of generative AI and symbolic AI, the old style classical AI, where rules as code fits in. I think there's ways of using generative AI to assist in the creation of rules as code, as well as ways of using generative AI to consume and develop ideas of products that can be hard-coded for understanding rules as code. So today I'm going to give you just a quick demo of different things I've been doing. The video is going to be my guide. I'm going to play it. I'm going to pause. Please feel free to interrupt and ask questions throughout the presentation. We could take this at the pace that the audience would like. A few disclaimers. So first, I'm not an official or representative of the government of Canada. I don't have any decision-making authority. So what I'm showing today, it's all essentially experimentation that I do within my role in the government of Canada. And I work with teams, and I try different things, and I share my learnings. But it's all unvalidated code. It's prototyping. It's showing the art of the possible, but nothing here is going to be deployed, or nothing is being deployed as of now. So yeah, it's just sharing some insights and thoughts and getting perspectives from everyone else. So I'll do that. Also note, I am a lawyer by training. I get into the computer science side by trying to find ways to more effectively process and work with rules, but I'm always learning. I appreciate any feedback, any criticism, frankly, and tips on things to do in the space. So please feel free to send them my way. And today's demo will be with Blawx and Claude. And there's a Blawx MCP server that allows me to connect remotely with Claude to do some edits and changes in the Blawx interface. I'll show you what that looks like. But I think you can interchange this with lots of different tools and lots of different approaches and all sorts of different ways to experiment in the space. So with that said, let's get started. Oh, actually, no, I got one more assumption. So one more assumption I have here is that the audience is familiar with rules as code. I think that's a fair assumption. And the second one is that there is some familiarity with Blawx, given that that has been presented before. If I am wrong and there are people who are not familiar with Blawx and would like a quick explanation as to what it is, I'm happy to do that right now. I'll give you 3 seconds to put your hand up. Okay.
Maybe it's good, just like for those that are maybe watching the video later that might not have the context.
Okay, I'll do a quick one, and I think Jason Morse is on the call, so he's always happy to correct me. It is him who is the creator of Blawx, but it is a predicate declarative logic programming language that is overlaid by Google Blockly, or sorry, it's not Google anymore. It is a Blockly product. I forget the creator now, but it's Blockly, and the purpose is to make the practice of writing, validating, correcting, testing rules in the form of code more approachable to people who are typically not programmers in the rulemaking space. And as a public servant in the government of Canada, what I'm trying to do is find ways of using tools like Blawx and others and see if there's modifications that can be made to them, practices that can be integrated into them, approaches to using these types of tools that make it easier for someone who does not have a programming background, like who I used to be, make it easier for them to get involved with these types of tools and to play around with them. And you will see some clips of locks throughout this process, so feel free to ask questions about the interface afterwards. Okay, so I will get, yes, there you go, Raspberry Pi. I forgot who it was, but that is it. All right, so I will get started with the demo, and as I said, it's gonna be a lot of pausing and playing. So neurosymbolic AI, from rules to code to web apps. I'm assuming you guys can see the video. If not, let me know. We are going to use a test case, which is the Canada Disability Benefit Regulation, specifically Section 2, which is eligibility criteria. You will see that on the screen right here. Now in Canada, we write our laws, we co-draft our laws in French and in English. So it's not one translating the other. They're both co-drafted simultaneously by two different drafters. So that's why you're seeing the French and the English side by side. Important to note as well, because when we prepare our rules, which is the next step, we want to treat both of those as authoritative and equally authoritative sources. So this is step one. Before I push play here, what we're going to do is we're going to call up a skill that I've designed in Claude in this case, and it is designed for building first drafts of encoded interpretations of Canadian federal legislation and regulation. So it's going to look at Justice Canada's XML, which is published on GitHub. It's going to look at the French and English legislative text, treat them as equal authoritative text. It will look for secondary sources like guides, manuals, policy guidance to help with the assistance. And also, I can connect to other MCP servers, such as in Canada, there's a Access to Algorithmic Justice organization that makes the case law in Canada accessible via MCP server. It will also connect to that. So it's going to go basically fetch a lot of information using the skill I developed, which has now been split into 3 different skills: a Blawx coder, a Blawx teacher, and a Blawx web app creator, which we can talk about later. And there's a shared core library. It's going to fetch information, and it's going to basically help me start a project. It's going to open a journal session, going to propose a way of encoding our Section 2 eligibility rules, and you will see that on screen in a second. So you got different steps. It's covering all the things I had mentioned before. It takes a bird's eye view at the rule in the context of how it applies to other rules, how it has evolved over time. It tries to consider the history around that rule. And it might ask for some interpretive assistance before you start your autonomous coding project. And if so, you can ask a couple questions, you provide some answers, and you proceed. So now we're going to ask the agent to build a first draft of code. There's multi-processes here. The first one is to actually fetch the rules themselves and place them into blocks using the Blawx formatting. So that's what you're going to see on the screen here. On the left, you've got your code. If there's errors, you can update the skill as required to make this fit. Now, also, oh, I see a question. Let's pause. Jacob, go ahead.
Yeah, I saw in the scroll there a couple seconds back. What are the ontology write tools?
The ontology tools. So I have the ontology just about to come up right here. So this is me just looking at the actual legislation itself, trying to pick out categories and relationships based on how frequently these terms appear throughout the rule, and if they are used in other rules that relate to it. I could try to get into more details on that, but I think Jason Morris is probably better suited to explain how that works in the blocks, and I'll let him answer that later on if that's fine. Okay, then I'll keep going. So these are the products that are being created. Sorry, not the products, the vocabulary that's being created, categories, and then relationships. They're going to be assembled into rules. First, we need to create the framework in which we're building our rules. And again, the coding language in the background here is SCASP. It's a declarative logic programming language. So now we're going to assemble the code together into the rules. So we're using the ontology. We're going to build our code. It has the Raspberry Pi Blockly interface on top. This is an interpretation, not a validated one, but an interpretation, entirely created by generative AI in this case, of subsection 2.1, and how it refers to the other paragraphs associated with this rule. And here are some examples of exceptions. So you got the rule and you got the French and English official text beside it. So now we also want to be building test questions throughout the process. Ideally, you do this in an iterative state. You don't do one and then the other. You do them both together. This test process is to confirm that the code functions. It does not confirm that it is valid or that the interpretations are correct. So we start by building a test question. This one is basically our generic question for this rule. Is a person eligible for a benefit in a specific month? You'll also build fact scenarios for testing with that test question. Some of the questions or some of the fact scenarios have been built based off historical reasons behind the rules and the changes and the amendments. So it seeks for good test subjects. But ideally, we can update those and work those through with the actual departments and the groups that are in charge for these rules. They are better suited for identifying these test questions. Now you run the test questions, you might run into some errors, like right here, scenario C, we had an error. It's going to go and make some changes. Now it is working. It does not mean that the code has been interpreted correctly. It simply means that it functions. It means it's ready for the next stage, which is validation. And here you'll see a couple different fact scenarios that we tested for our test question. You'll see that the results were the ones that were intended by the agent. Now the important step, which is, or actually one more thing to show you before we get to the next step. The next step is rule validation, but there is one more important type of test question you want to build, which is your giant kind of like hypothetical, how does this law apply in every possible scenario type question. So for these ones, I'm basically putting everything as generalized assumptions of it is possible that this is true. I'm not telling you it's true. I'm not telling you it's false. Consider it as a possibility. Tell me, given all of these possibilities, what are all the ways in which this rule can apply? And alternatively, you can ask the reverse question, tell me all the ways in which this rule does not apply. If you do that, you can get a giant list of explanations, a giant list of answers, and you parse through those answers, you will see different pathways of reasoning for that rule. It gives you basically a mapping of the logical reasoning for that rule. And from here, there's a lot of fun stuff we can do, and I'll show you in the web app section, step 5, things I've been building based off this detailed explanation. So now we're at step 4. This is validation. This is when we have human experts sitting down, working together, reviewing the code, and actually making sure that the encoded interpretations are good ones, that they don't overstep, that they are properly aligned with the way the rules are supposed to be explained. Lots of different things that need to be done in this step, and it's frankly the one that is in most need of improvement and that I think we really need to work on the most as a rules as code community. I'm going to show you some stuff I've been doing to help with that. So first, we've got the session notes that we can review. So you got an agent working on this. It's going to collect some notes based off the process. You can give this to the users who are going to review and validate the code. It'll walk through the structural kind of framework of this rules as code project. It's a good starting point. But then you actually have to look at the code itself. And this is where I've been playing around with something that's a little new. And it's early days for this one. But what if we can use generative AI tools to help teach rules as code thinking and processing? Like, yes, there's always the risk of hallucination. There's a risk of error. You can't trust these tools to properly do rules as code and just assume that it's been done properly. But what if we can take someone and meet them where they're at? So say you have a policy expert. They're not a legal expert. They're not a legislative expert. They're not very familiar with AI. What if we can meet them where they're at, give them an 8 out of 10 difficulty for a learning experience, and walk them through some basic rules as code, like teach them some basic thinking with the tool, and kind of onboard them into that world? And what if we can supplement some of the missing components for that individual? So for example, they might not have immediate access to a legal expert or a legislative expert. What if we can try to mock that person for the time being in this step and try to give feedback that is similar to what you would receive from that type of individual? You can use that as a starting point to hopefully teach rules as code at a wider scale to more people. And I think, like, you know, if we can meet people where they're at, there's lots of knowledge to extract out of people. Like, you can be a stakeholder, you're not at all part of the rulemaking process, but you're just subject to these rules on a 24/7 basis. There's a lot of knowledge there that would be nice to pull into the rulemaking process. And when we talk about validation and how we confirm that rules are working properly, you might have a policy expert that has a specific application, a practical purpose for that rule that they are intending to seek in the encoding process. You might have a legal expert on that same team that is more focused on legal risk. And they will take it slow and they will say no to things because they need to be concerned about the risk associated with it. You have legislative counsel that are focused on the formalization of the rules, how they pair and organize and structure together. And there's a whole art to statutory modern statutory interpretation and just general statutory interpretation, working rules across different jurisdictions. That is complex stuff. So this is really the idea of trying to meet people where they're at, and me trying to start something in that area, test it out a little bit, interview the user for their background, a bit of knowledge on what they're good at, where they need help with, and then hopefully walk them through a little demo and then give them their own content to work with. So here I'm hinting at maybe starting with the rock, paper, scissors project, which is one of the defaults in Blawx. So after we got that, we do the actual review, the validation. Jason says he's been working on version 3 app and reviewed it yet, but from what I understand, there's going to be some updates on this validation interface, and I'm very keen on testing that out. Now we're getting to the web app development, which I've been having a lot of fun with. So there's a variety of different things we can do with our rules once they're encoded. I want to try different stuff with different rules. One thing is building web apps that run off different encodings other than blocks. So what if I can use the detailed answers and explanations from one of my test questions? And say we have a developer somewhere, they've already got an interface in place for a certain process. What if they can connect their agent to this legal oracle, the rules that are clearly outlined and validated by rulemakers, and use it to assure that the properties of the web app they currently have in place are legally compliant? So this is essentially property testing. It is ensuring that the properties of one app meet the requirements of the oracle that dictates the legal requirements that have to be met. I played around a little bit with this. It's still very new to me, if I'm being honest. But in this case, I created a web app that is just JavaScript, essentially. And I built it by analyzing all the detailed answers and explanations from the Blawx code and identifying the properties, and then it proposed a process in which to ask those questions to the user. It has the capacity to indicate right away if certain information does not meet the requirement, if a lack or an uncertainty has an impact on the decision and whether information needs to be fulfilled. So in this case, the user is uncertain about the DTC eligibility and is indicating that this is something that has to be met for the particular benefit to go through. So just, again, trying to play with ways of having a legal oracle and all sorts of applications that can cite to it. Now, another thing I'm testing out, and it's, again, very early, is can we use the logical structure of the code as an anchor for translations? In Canada, as I mentioned before, we have English and French legislative text. Can I use the English, I guess the pseudo-English code with the official English legislative text and the French legislative text to build a web app that still meets the legislative language in French? Alternatively, you could try to make some that communicate the same information it could be in Spanish, or it could be a foreign language, or it could be indigenous languages. There's different ways of looking at this. Again, early level experimentation, just seeing what is possible here and playing around with different stuff. Another thing I've been playing around with is this rules shark. So there's a little bit of a background story to this. For those who are familiar with the game Catan, I am known to play Catan in a way that annoys certain people and makes others laugh. I try to find loopholes within the rules, and I try to exploit them. I try to find negotiation tactics that are not explicitly not permitted. I essentially try to, in a fun way, exploit the rules and see if there's a way to kind of read something in a manner that serves me but is not the correct way. So I'm trying to play around with this concept of a playful kind of white hat rule shark that will take an encoded interpretation rule and look for ways to like defeat it. And again, it's very early days. There's nothing here that I think is actually of high quality, which is why I'm showing you it. I think it's just kind of an early example of what's going on. But it can find interesting angles and frame it as like, this person thinks they're eligible to A and B, so they're going to go for that angle. You got to make sure that the rule is clear so that they don't interpret that incorrectly. So kind of a strategizing around rules, that type of interface. Another one, and we're going to wrap up in a bit. I'm sure there's questions, so I want to make sure there's enough time for that. This one is sort of a different subject. It's different content. We're working with building codes here. We're not working with the eligibility rules anymore. These are building codes. So think about rules for how you can design and structure a building. What I tried doing here is write building codes in a language that could then get integrated into a mock architectural app, an app that allows people who are designing buildings to kind of do a digital framework for it before proceeding with the process. And I was thinking, what if there was a way to limit the actual design elements of that application so that you're only permitted to build structures that are legally compliant within your jurisdiction? So in this case, we've got a stair. Essentially, these are metrics for how you build stairs and steps in a dwelling. The rules are a little different in different contexts, and it just shows you how you can play around with the structure and how the rules are used as a framework to limit the construction or the design of any structure that would not meet the building code requirement. So just a different way of playing around with these things. And then finally, the key thing, which I think all of us are aware of with rules as code, is you can just rebuild. You can have different sets of code that can go into the same type of web app and use it for different sorts of scenarios. So you kind of focus on web app development as one thing, the writing the rules in the code is one thing, integrate them together, have experts focus on their specific areas. And what I showed there is just an example of like different types of Blawx code in the same type of web app. You wouldn't use generative AI to just do all these web apps. You can use it more so for like planning design. Ideally, you would have an actual group of UX and UI designers building good web apps. These are just demos. But yeah, I'll stop there. Lots of things to throw out. I'm sure there are questions. So let's pause there and get some thoughts from everyone.
You've covered so much in that video. Is that video, I mean, it'll be available here through the Rules as Code Guild, but do you have it somewhere else with notes and thoughts attached to it?
I have an older version with less things that I shared on LinkedIn. I am working through this video and evolving it over time because there's a couple presentations I'll be doing and I want to have something available. Might sever parts and go one thing at a time depending on the group I'm in. Yeah, for the time being, it's still in development. I need to make some notes so that I can just kind of get to the point and not talk all around the point. That's something I could work a little bit on. But I think with this audience,
yeah, you'll get some good feedback.
Yeah.
So questions before I go into my list. Who's up first? Where to start? I know, a lot to take in. I'll start then. My interest is in the onboarding thing. This is such a critical thing. I know the Axiom Foundation is working on all of America's rules, right? Like the speed at which how we can accelerate this is not just developing the AI, but developing the people to use the AI. So the onboarding stuff that you've been working on and using it as a teaching tool, have you actually tried that out with those different kind of personas that we need in the room?
I have. So I've been trying to essentially find a way to do AI upskilling in a sense with the rule makers, the people who ideally you'd want kind of validating these rules and sharing it with the public. And I've done some testing with a policy expert that I work with and a legislative counsel that I work with. They're just playing around with it now, giving some insights. But to me, I think like ideally you can have, if there's constraints that you need to follow that are jurisdictional specific, you can have the people who are best at identifying those build frameworks to allow others to essentially build first drafts, first versions of these types of applications that more likely align with those structures than just kind of letting them go about it on their own. So you can give specific tasks to specific experts, get them to work on it. And one thing I noticed, especially too, with my earlier versions of this Blawx teacher, or again, it's a Blawx teacher, but frankly, it should be a rules as code teacher, and it's just teaching whatever tool you want to use. One of the things I've been noticing early on is the view of the stakeholder being very important. I work within government, so I work a lot with people within government. I know policy people have different interpretations than legal and legislative. That's just the nature of how things are. But the stakeholder view, I think, is one that I would love to find ways to integrate a little more in the process. And if we can teach, like the limitations of the structuring of laws to the average citizen who could have, an immense amount of knowledge on something very, very niche and unique, that could be a fun way to pull that knowledge into the rulemaking process and essentially democratize this as much as you can. Doesn't mean that everyone's opinion is the best opinion, right? We have experts in different domains for different reasons, but rules are for everyone. And if there's a way to kind of extract everyone's knowledge and put it in there, I think there's at least to me, I think that's a very interesting venture to explore.
Absolutely. Can you imagine this, in version 11 or whatever, attached to a Taiwanese type Gov0 experiment, like you literally have your community creating your rules for you? That would be, yeah, quite a thing to get to. All right, eventually. I'll shut up. Somebody else with a question for Martin. Go for it, Jacob.
Yes, I have one. Oh, there are a couple of things. One of them is just a comment. This is going to be amazing for enabling trade, international trade, right? The one thing I was thinking about, you have red teaming and blue teaming, right? You're white and black hat, and you can have, I guess, a virtual courtroom and pass it back there. One comment, I guess, would be that it would be fantastic to hunt down those exploiting these rules, right? And fill those gaps and, stick some kind of agents on to figure out how we can close those and for a more robust society. The strange thing I've found is the semantics, right, of these words that we use and how we can align them in a centralized manner. And that's something that I'm actively seeking. And I'm sure you're actively seeking this as well when you wish to fortify the rules, right, in-house. How do you go about creating that? Who owns that?
Yeah, that's a tough question. From what I understand, Finland's been doing a fair bit of work in the space. It's something I haven't looked at it recently, but it's something I'd want to explore. To me, like, it is hard to gauge. There are obviously, definitions, like clear definitions that are structured. There is the Interpretation Act that provides some clarity in certain instances. There's referencing where like you can change the definition within the context of a particular rule, even if there is a higher level interpretation that's usually used. There are things like that to consider. But getting that bird's eye perspective, that's the hard part. Like seeing the impact one word has across different places. That's one of those things that rules as code on its own, I think, is gonna have trouble with. But if you pull in this like the generative AI component, the high level bird's eye view lens, that kind of macro lens of data, that's where I think there could be some interesting insight in how we use definitions, how we use terminology across different rule sets, and whether there's a need to, even within like Canada, we have 3 different jurisdictions. Like we got the municipal level, we got the provincial level, the federal. Maybe there's a need for some more alignment there. It's a great question. I don't really know where to go with it right now, but it's a great question.
Jacob has an idea.
A follow-up, if I may, right? We have common law and we have civil law, right? And in Quebec, we have that civil law. And in that case, you could say, well, this is centralized. But, right, then to your point, there are many departments, right? There are many interpretations. And I'm really going to be, it's going to be exciting to see where this goes in that regard. Thank you.
No problem.
Next question. I cannot believe that this crowd with that presentation has no questions. Yeah, go Haruku. Excellent.
Thank you, Martin, for the presentation. It was very interesting. I have one question. You mentioned the French and English versions are treated as the same authoritative manner. Do you sometimes have different outputs in the tests?
Yeah, so the interface I'm using right now for Blawx, it is unilingual, it is English. So the code is pseudo-English. Now the question about French and English law having different interpretations, yes, there's been instances where we've had to look at an ambiguity within those rules and an interpretation had to be collected. And there's a whole process to that. And there are legal experts that specialize specifically in those types of issues as well. There's also bigerial interpretation, which is interpreting within common law and civil law. In Canada, most of Canada is common law system, but Quebec is a civil law system. yet federal rules apply everywhere. So there's an interpretation layer there. It's complicated, and it's something that I don't even feel like I'm capable of speaking to a full degree. But it's exactly why I think these teaching tools that help integrate those minds into this process are important. If we can get those people who have like years of accumulation of knowledge in specific fields contributing and not feeling like it's an extra work responsibility, but rather something that is self-fulfilling for them, that helps their job, and that is empowering, and that feels like fairly easy to do. That is how I would see those types of issues getting resolved.
Nanosword, it's the kind of very similar to what you do in real life at LSB. That sort of practice is the same. When you can't find something, discrepancies, you talk, these experts talk and solve. It's the same with the AI.
Yes, and another thing, sorry, it cut off a bit. Feel free to continue.
If I'm making myself clear.
No, so what I was going to say is that there are situations where you might have multiple interpretations, and we have to acknowledge that. There are situations where we might not feel comfortable just putting a particular interpretation. We have to find workarounds around that too. So it is a very real consideration, and something that I'd love to pull in more knowledge from experts in that field into this work.
Marty, I got a question on that actually. Do you have like an example in mind? Because like it seems like a lot of the time the rules as code, when it's literally rules as code, it's like, okay, if this and this, then we have this, or there's a formula and it just is the formula. And then, there might be like leaf nodes in that computation graph where you're supposed to say, okay, does the parent live with the child or something? And there it's like you have to get maybe a judge involved potentially, but it's not exactly part of the rules engine per se. Yeah, how much of the like what you are seeing here, or just in general in Canada, falls in each camp?
Sure, I'll give you an example. I don't know if it hits exactly the point you're making, but I think it's around it, and I can adjust as needed. But I did an experiment a few years back, I guess in 2024, where I encoded parts of the Canadian Navigable Waters Act. And in the act, it says that there's an exception where a body of water that is, I believe it was an irrigation channel or something else, could not be deemed navigable water. So it didn't matter. It's not allowed. It was section 2.01. It was an exception to the rule in section 2, to the definition in section 2. Now, there is case law that expresses that when we interpret legislation like that, in situations where something, I'm trying to remember the wording, and again, like it's worth double checking. I'm going to give you my recollection of this. It's worth double checking. There are situations where functionally a body of water, even if it was an artificial irrigation channel, it is navigable. It is so large that you can put a boat on it and you can drive it. And in those situations where functionally it meets that definition, it doesn't matter if the law itself says it's excluded, it has to be included in the definition. And there's a body of water somewhere in Western Canada that I think was part of that consideration. Again, don't fully trust me 100% on that. It's worth double checking. It's been a few years. But there are situations like that. And we can say like, oh, well, you know what, the rule's dumb. It needs to be fixed. I think that, it's a little simplistic. It requires us to have such foresight and such immediate capacity to adjust to make those changes. I think we just have to kind of meet where it's at right now, acknowledge that they exist, try to identify them, and work around solutions to work with those types of situations. Let me know if that answers it, Max. It might not, and I'm happy to kind of catch up afterwards and see if I can find a better example for you.
No, I'm always on hunt for these, so appreciate it.
Cool.
Jacob.
I guess as a follow-up to that, when we don't know what we don't know, right? In that way, we really want to trust these systems. They seem so robust. And where do you see this human in the loop? Because there's so many rules and cases and propagations and convolutions that are made, right? How can we find those ones that might slip through the cracks but cause more exceptions and problems? how do you think that could be navigated? What do you see as an interface for that?
As an interface. So, okay, well, I guess I'd start by saying I think there's inevitably going to be rules that are just complex by nature, and that maybe you can encode the scaffolding of those rules, the general structure of those rules. But there's going to be a nature to that rule that just requires it to be essentially in every case viewed with subjective, with like factual interpretation, a open definition that's delegated, and you don't want to over encode those things. Now, within the confines of what is a reasonable rules of code project, which again, it depends on what your goal is, the nature of the rule, the size of the rule, how often it's cited, all those things are important to ask. I think there are ways, kind of like with the rule shark that I was showing, to structure them internally for that type of vigorous analysis, for like detailed review, trying to find where it breaks, finding areas that are ambiguous enough that the AI agent's going to ask you for help with the interpretation, and use those as your starting points. And if you can point that to legal or legislative experts, they might already have an answer for you. They might not. It might be actually a place that can be improved. So I think there's like, you build the code, you acknowledge that the code has not been validated, that there's it's an interpretation. We might need to dial down the interpretation. We might need to fine tune certain things. Start with that, but then really try to approach it through that critical lens and find the little places that could break, and do it internally, manage internally, then move forward from there.
Who's up next? The more people we have trained and used our AI friends to train it, the more people can spot those things, Jacob. So right down at the municipal level, it would be great. Go for it, man.
I should clarify, when I say internally, I mean in the case of like, if you want as a government to encode a rule and deploy it, it's important to do all your checks internally. But I think there's a huge space for this on the external side. People who are affected by the rules, communicating the problems that they're dealing with. So don't want to knock that part off. I think that's a massive part of this too.
Yeah. I'm the citizen representation in the room, right? Not working for a government, and that's citizens' assemblies knocking over rules, and would seem to be the most democratic and sensible way to do this. People that have the real knowledge. Yes, Jason. Good to hear from you, mate.
This is phenomenal because I'm seeing things that Marty has never shown anyone before, and I'm like, oh yes, someone finally tried it. That's awesome. I just wanted to let you know that if there isn't a lot of more questions coming, I could show the enhanced validation feature that Marty mentioned before.
Let's do it. Yes, we've got raised eyebrows and happy faces. Jason,
Cool.
Please do.
Although I think, Jason, there is an opportunity for you to present it in a whole dedicated session, if that.
Oh, I mean, I would be happy to do both.
Right.
We have another 10, 20 minutes, so please
I'll
do.
give a tease preview then of a more fulsome demonstration later. Is that sharing?
Not yet. Yes, it is now.
Lovely. So you can see that the user interface is almost unrecognizable, but I promise it's all the same stuff underneath, with the exception of the one additional feature, which is this testing interface. So this allows you to kind of organize tests, and the questions and fact scenarios that Marty was showing you are here. But then it also has these things that are called tests, which are basically just a combination of a question, a fact scenario, and the number of explanations that you're expecting to receive from it. And you've got this set of them down here, which you can run, and then it tells you which of them are succeeding, which are failing. And you can go into a failed test and run it manually, and then you can see through the explanations what might be going wrong. It just so happens that I genuinely have an error in this one where it is somehow possible for the same player to have thrown the signs that are being considered. So it says they're bob through rock and bob through scissors. And of course, that's not the kind of thing we're interested in. So then you could click on the section 4, see the text of the section that's being encoded, switch over to that section, look at the encoding, and there's a typo in there. That should say player, I think. I wonder if that fixes it, or if, yeah, because it says they're not the same object. So let's try that. Run the tests again, see if it goes all green. Yeah, it does. So now it's getting the number of explanations it expected. So that's a short preview of the full thing that will be coming later.
I hesitate to turn my microphone back on because my dog is going crazy. There's somebody at the door. I don't know whether you can hear it. That was a great preview. I can't wait to see the whole thing. Max.
Yeah, super cool. I guess maybe a question, maybe more for Marty. Like with, have you been able to compare to some of the government tools that sort of already have computational policy underneath SPSTM or like other web forms or something like that? Like, I wonder if like having an eval or something on how quickly it can replicate some of those existing tools using this. I don't know. Like,
I haven't tested as much as I want to. I've looked at them like briefly. I am, what would be the word? I'm very much in like this part of my work where I do 80% of the work, 90% of the work, and there's the last 10% that like technically should get done, but then I'm on to something else and trying to do different things. I very much work as a one-man team for the time being. So it's just a matter of managing my time in different places. But that would be a good idea to actually look at what currently exists, compare it, play around with that information. And like in the case of the SPSTM data, that'd be great data to feed and to use in this kind of context for sure. So yeah, thank you for the reminder. Definitely worth checking.
I'm interested to know, as you start showing, this is quite new, right? So you've only just started showing other people in the Canadian government what is possible, and onboarding just a couple of people. Is it within your remit to accelerate this, or do you need outside sort of help from your one-man band in order to accelerate this, and how do you go about that?
I'd say there's a lot of grassroots support internally, and there's lots of people who've contributed advice and thought and tested products when it has not been their obligation to do so. And in that sense, I've been getting a lot of support. There's no way that I'd be able to do these types of things without that type of insight. But again, I got to work with what I've got, and this is what I have right now. Again, I think there's lots of momentum, a lot of positive momentum happening. I work closely with Legislative Council that observe the work, that are playing around with these tools, that provide me useful insight with my work. Similarly, policy experts who do that as well. I just gotta kind of just keep working at it and see what happens.
I guess sort of along that line, like, I wonder what can help, because it seems so promising. I want you to build the case for it not just being you. Like, are there evals or like how, estimation of how much this could improve the productivity of these staff? Like, can you do an experiment with them to like show that this is, I don't know.
It's on the list, Max. It's on the list.
Sorry, I keep adding
There's
things.
so many
not
things.
helping.
No, like they're all things I absolutely want to do. I tried to make a cost benefit kind of thing for it, and it became like my undergrad's in economics, and it became like a macroeconomic an attempt at a macroeconomic model from an undergraduate, essentially, that doesn't know what he's talking about it, and overcomplicated, and it didn't work out the way I wanted to. There are tons of things that we could do and explore. But I think number one is there's a lot of people who still think generative AI is going to solve it all. They think that generative AI on its own can be used, and the accuracy will get good enough that these types of issues don't matter. I personally think that the trustworthiness and explainability are key components when it comes to communicating laws, and there's going to be that need no matter what. As people start to realize that a little more, we might see change, we might get more momentum, more movement. But listen, I do what I can with what I have, and I got to be careful with how I speak because this is a recorded conversation. So I gotta express that I'm happy with what I'm seeing internally, and I want to push forward. But we work with what we get.
Sure. I guess though, and I don't know if this is confidential or something, but like aside from like that shouldn't be something you're doing ideally. Like, are there existing processes for evaluating the efficiency of the staff that are doing this kind of work today with, or the drafters? And I don't know.
There probably is somewhere. I just don't have it on me.
Okay.
It's worth checking out.
Yeah. Does anyone know if there are like other governments that do that kind of thing? Could be.
Yes.
Okay. Where?
Please expand.
Yeah. You have my attention.
I could just say yes. I could say it's very much needed, but it's also a double-edged sword, right? Because you have very strict policies in place when you interpret it from a legal standpoint.
Yeah, another thing that's happening like just now, finally, that I'm hoping is going to have an impact on the motivation inside the public sector is that the Netherlands has finally open sourced their ALEF tool, which is being used to automate fully 50% of all of the tax determinations that are being made by the Dutch government. And if there's any proof in pudding, that's the pudding right there. Like they would not be running their entire tax system if they weren't getting ROI. So I'm optimistic that might make more people pay attention, but we also have to keep telling people about that because they still don't know what's happening.
If I'm not mistaken, I thought at one point New Zealand's tax system was running on a version of Prolog. Can anyone confirm that that's the case?
Can't
That would be
confirm.
the first I've heard of it.
Can't confirm that. We do have in the last 18 months a new Ministry for Regulation that has been set up specifically to streamline the whole process. It was we have a coalition government here in New Zealand at the moment until November when the new elections happen. And this is a ministry that is literally just underway at the moment. And one of the Friends of the Rules of Code Guild, Townhall, Nadia, is involved in that. And she was involved in the Better Rules and Original Rules as Code work that we did down here. So I can certainly find out, or we can certainly find out a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, that's the idea. We did the work right at the very beginning. And to get this started, yeah, it would seem crazy that we're not. I'll find out more, Jacob. Any other questions? So Jason, you just dropped some stuff into the chat, right?
I think that was Matthew.
Matthew. I can't see Matthew, but great. Thank you, Matthew. It would be good to get the details of that use case you were talking about, Jason, the open source.
Yeah, if I can find a link.
That'd be great, because then we can talk about it and refer to it as a group. The more people that hear from us, the better. And there's maybe some things to discuss as a group in another conversation about how we can cross-promote some of this work that Martin's doing, that you're all doing, to make it a little bit louder and get some traction. I know, Max, with the Beak Centre, you've got Georgetown University behind you to a degree, which is really helpful. But we need some more of that happening. I know the Australian government has the Australian Premier just gave an address on AI specifically, that could be tagged onto to help and promote this space. For now, though, we're getting towards the top of the hour. Does anybody have any last questions for Martin or for Jason about Blawx? And
feel free to message us afterwards if it comes later. There's like, if you have questions for me, let me know. You can reach me out at my work email, martin.perron@servicecanada.gc.ca. I could type it in the chat. So yeah, feel free to reach out afterwards if you got questions.
Awesome.
And you're also, sorry to interrupt, and also on Slack, which is obviously also a nice direct way of communication.
Yeah, that's what I was just going to say. In our RaC Guild, there is a group chat, obviously. There is a Slack channel for all these questions and discussion, so that we can, ask you more, Martin. For now, though, thank you all for coming along this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. And we have the next RaC Guild Town Hall falls on the first Wednesday in the month, which is the 2nd of September, and it's the opposite time zone. So for me and for the Australians, it's in our evening. You can go to racguild.org/events and see what's coming up. And there's also all of the links to the recordings on the YouTube channel of our previous 2 years worth of RaC Guild town halls for you to go through. And you'll find the original Blawx presentation in there. Brush up on that one before Jason's next presentation, I would say. As for now, thank you, everybody. Good to see some new faces in the room. And well done, Martin, for the work that you're doing, and keep going. We're all behind you in spirit, 100%. Thank you very much indeed, everybody. Kia ora.